How you doing, everybody? Brian Sr. here. If you are a true blue, red-blooded, liberty-loving, Bible-thumping, gun-toting, truth-seeking, fed up with the status quo, tyranny-smashing, tossing a tea overboard, American patriot, agent of change, then you are in the right place. We're going to put our heads together. We're going to do what Americans do best. We're going to solve problems. We're going to educate one another. We're going to encourage one another as we lift up our families, our friends, our neighbors, and our country. The American dream lives here. So we got a special show today. I'm really excited. I have a guest that's going to call in for an interview, or actually I'm going to call him. His name is Douglas V. Gibbs. He's a constitutional scholar, radio host, author, and he was gracious enough to agree to call in the show. And so we're going to talk to him about a number of topics, mostly based around the Constitution. So before we get started, let's, as we always do, let's open up with prayer and give glory to God. Lord, we love you. We praise you. We just want you to be a part of our lives. We want you to be in our hearts every day, every moment of every day, Lord. We want to rely on you for all the decisions we make. We want to look to your wisdom. We want to look to your word. Lord, we're here today on this podcast because we want to change our communities for the better. We want to change our country for the better. And ultimately, we want to turn our country and our communities towards you, Lord. We draw upon your strength. We draw upon your wisdom as we make decisions and as we struggle to take back the power that belongs to us that the government has taken away from us, Lord. We love you. We praise you. In Jesus' name, amen. So, like I said, Douglas V. Gibbs was nice enough to agree to have an interview with me today. So I think that's really cool. I don't know the guy very well, so it's awesome that he took this opportunity and took time out of his busy schedule to go ahead and talk with us today. So let me give him a call real quick, and then we'll start the interview.
Hello.
Hello, Douglas. How are you today?
I am doing fantastic, sir.
All right. Very good. So I gave a little short interview or introduction, but I'll go ahead and go through some of it a little more detail. Today, we're very blessed to have with us Douglas V. Gibbs. He is a constitutional scholar, an author, a radio host for AM 1490 KMET. His show, Constitution Radio with Douglas V. Gibbs, airs at 1 p.m. on Saturdays, and it can be heard live worldwide at kmet1490.com. He's also the president of the Constitution Association, a fellow of the American Freedom Alliance, a sentinel for the Heritage Foundation, an award-winning blogger, freelance newspaper columnist, a United States Navy veteran. So my first question is, when do you have time to eat and sleep? That sounds like a lot going on there.
Yeah, and I'm adding classes constantly. So, yeah, folks ask me, Doug, when you get a chance to sleep? And I say, on occasion.
Yes, that's very good.
Sleep is overrated anyway. I'll have plenty of time to sleep someday.
Exactly. We got a lot of work to do to take our country back, so sleeping can come later, right?
Exactly.
So I've never formally met Douglas. Do you prefer Doug or Douglas?
Well, Douglas is what I go out there professionally with, but my friends call me Doug, so please do.
Okay. Thank you, Doug. So we've never really met. We've corresponded recently through some emails. I heard about Douglas or Doug through the GOP office in Hemet, San Jacinto. I called them up to kind of give them a piece of my mind because I've been so disappointed with how the Republicans have been acting the last recent history, I guess. So I called them up to give them a piece of my mind. I ended up talking with a gentleman named Dale Dealeman, and he was such a nice guy that I didn't really have the heart to lay into him like I had planned. But we had a great conversation, and he ended up telling me about Doug and that you give classes for the Constitution here in Beaumont. And he recommended that I contact you And so here we are. So in the email correspondence, I mentioned that I would be interested in your opinion on a few topics concerning the Constitution. And then I researched a little bit into your website and some other stuff, and I found some stuff that was pretty interesting. And I'd really like to ask about some of the organizations that you're affiliated with just to start off, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so the Constitution Association, what is that exactly, and how did you get involved with doing that?
Is a 501c3 that I created in 2014 after in Temecula Valley, Tea Party tried to rise 3 times and died a internal conflict death each time.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, the one thing everybody won't fight about is the Constitution. So how about we start an organization with the Constitution as the central theme? In July 23rd of 2015, we wound up achieving a 501c3 status.
Awesome.
We have helped candidates in the past. Being a 501c3, what we do with candidates is because we can't endorse them, we give them a constitutional grade. And we put out a voting guide based on those grades. And then those who get the highest grades get a certificate of constitutionality from our organization. So we help with small candidates. We put out pocket constitutions. We're very involved in the homeschooling, trying to get more involved in public and private school.
That's awesome.
And one of our latest things that we've been up to is on December 7th, we filed a lawsuit against Kamala Harris for being ineligible for office. She's not a natural-born citizen.
Okay.
We're currently still trying to serve her.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So that sounds like a pretty cool deal. I saw also on your website for that Constitution Association that you mentioned the Convention of States. I've been looking into that a little bit myself, but I'm not real well versed on it. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, how it works and the process involved?
Well, sure. And the Convention of States is a controversial issue with a lot of folks on the conservative side, because there are some folks that see it as a very important tool in restoring our republic, and a lot of folks see it as a very dangerous tool that could be used to rewrite the Constitution and send us into deeper, dire straits. What it comes from, the Convention of States, it comes from Article 5. In Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution, it gives us the methods on how to amend the Constitution. The Founding Fathers, in their wisdom, realized that they weren't perfect. There may need to be changes. There may need to be additional authorities, or there may be things that would come up in the future that they were not aware of, such as maybe we could say the internet, aviation, and space flight, for example. And in order for the federal government to have any authorities regarding those things, technically they would need to request it through a proposed amendment. So the proposal of amendments to change the Constitution or add authorities requires either 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose an amendment, or 2/3 of the states, after they give application, to hold convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. That's what a convention of states is where the states propose amendments through a convention in which they have delegates at that convention. In the convention, based on past rules seen throughout our history of our country, each state would have one vote when it comes to proposing the amendment. Once a majority decides that an amendment should be proposed, it would still have to go out to the state legislatures and or conventions in each of the states, depending on what the state decides it wants to do, or Congress. And then from there, it would require 3/4 approval by the state's ratification. So proposal through a convention of states does not mean the Constitution has been rewritten. It just means that there's a proposed amendment, still requires 3/4 to approve it. The idea has been very it has surfaced quite a bit in the recent past, because there are certain amendments to the Constitution that we don't believe Congress would ever propose. And if
Right.
it's going to happen, it would have to happen through the states. A balanced budget amendment would be one.
Yes.
Repeal of the 17th Amendment would be another. In fact, those are the top two items that comes up in the mock conventions over the last few years. And so that's what a convention of states would be. In today's current situation, there are fears by some persons that that convention could be hijacked very easily by
Right. The runaway
corporate
convention
interests,
theory.
exactly, and
Yes.
all that. But the fail-safe has always been it still takes 3/4 of the states to ratify. So if we've got 3/4 of the states ratifying amendments that rewrite the Constitution in a bad way, we got bigger problems than a runaway convention,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
And the beauty of this convention of states, and actually just the makeup of the Constitution as a whole, is like, especially the convention of states, it blows up the talking point that the Constitution is an antiquated, outdated document that doesn't fit our society. Like you mentioned just a minute ago, our founders were brilliant enough to understand that times are going to change, and they made ways for us to go with those times, but they didn't make it easy, which was also wisdom, because you don't want people just coming in with a wrecking ball and changing everything. So
exactly. Well, and that's where the living, breathing argument and the allowing the judicial branch to interpret the Constitution is very dangerous, because what they're doing is they're manipulating the Constitution in ways that were never intended.
yes.
If there's going to be any manipulation, any changes, it has to go through that. It's supposed to go through that process. And as you stated, it's not an easy process. It better be darn good, and both sides or all sides
Right.
are going to like it if it's going to get through, basically, because it's such a difficult process to get through. The wheels of government grind slowly on purpose.
Yes.
There is such thing as an efficient, quick government. That's called a dictatorship.
Yeah, that's not it, though. We know how that movie ends. The dictatorships
We know
very
that.
rarely,
Exactly.
very rarely benefit anyone but the dictator and his friends and family. So,
Right.
So the term limits. Did you mention that? I don't think you mentioned that. I think you said
No, I didn't. And to be honest, I am not a supporter of term limits for the legislature. I am for the president, and I think that the
right.
amendment that limited the president to 2 terms was a good amendment. But when it comes to the legislature, I'm not necessarily in favor of term limits, not because I don't believe these guys should be lifetime politicians. I do believe they shouldn't be. I agree with the idea that they shouldn't spend a lifetime in Congress. But the problem is you have term limits. What you're going up against here is not really a problem with the politicians as much as it is a problem with the bureaucracy that's beneath that veneer. You've got, the staffers, the deep state, as people have come to call it, the bureaucracy, the administrative branch, the fourth branch of government, some people call it. And they are entrenched, and they are good at what they do. And if you wind up with term limits where you're switching out, Congress critters every 2 terms or 3 terms, then what you wind up with are a bunch of Congress critters that are greener, not really equipped to deal with the more experienced enemy that's behind the enemy lines there. That's really guiding this country through this, as staffers. They're the ones that read the bills. Pelosi once said, "Well, we'll find out what's in it once we pass it," because they don't really read this stuff. What they do is they ask their staff to read it, and their staff tells them what's in it. Well, the staff has an ideological leaning. They're going to give them their side of what they read, not necessarily what's in it. And this is where we run into our problems. So if ever there needs to be term limits, I don't believe it's for the politicians as much as for that underground staff. I'm a firm believer that every president, every administration, regardless of ideology, ought to just fire all the staffers when they take office and a whole new set come in. Seriously.
Yeah.
It just because, and it's funny because I talk to, even at the local level, city council members, school board members, same thing. Well, I just did what the staffer was recommending. That they don't really read this stuff, and then the ones that do, they wind up getting run off on a rail because how dare they go against the staff.
Right, and that's a point that I brought up about. I did a podcast a couple episodes back about trying to look at everything that's going on in day-to-day stuff that we're experiencing right now from a different perspective. And I'm like, one of the points I was making is, President Trump having a 4-year siesta, so to speak, may not be the worst thing, because he came in and, he's a competent man and he knows how to run organizations. But I imagine there was a point about a month into it where he was lying in bed going, holy crap, what did I get myself into? And,
Exactly.
he might be able to come in 2024 if he chooses to run again. And he might be able to just walk in and say, okay, everybody in this building right now, thank you for your service. We will no longer be requiring your services. I've got everybody I need to take care of this. So it may not be a bad thing to have 4 years off in between Trump
he's got 4 years
administrations.
of experience. Now he's going to watch what the other side's going to do for 4 years and come back in. And, it's funny because one of my co-hosts of my radio program, Dennis, says, it's funny because everybody was jazzed about Trump because he's known for "you're fired," from his
Right.
reality show, and he didn't do that enough. He was actually not "you're fired," enough, and we're thinking he realizes that.
Yeah. So this is something that I know this could be a controversial question too, but how would you feel about making amendments to the Second Amendment to further clarify, because the left, my last podcast was on the language of the left and the way that we fall into their traps, how they twist language and we accept terms that are completely false. And we use those terms in our everyday conversations. And even NRA lawyers, when they're talking, they will say assault rifle. And it's like, it always drives me nuts. Why are you using that term? That's a false term. Don't use that term. You're giving them power they don't have. But I mean, the Second Amendment is 27 words in one sentence. And it's probably the most important 27 words in the last 230 years that have strung together. And how would you feel about maybe adding some clarity to that? And I know that creates a situation that, be careful what you wish for. It could backfire.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
I don't believe clarity is necessary. I believe going back to the original intent of the language and the original meaning of the words is what needs to be gone back to. And, when we talk about the U.S. Constitution, and when I remind everybody of, it's not just some set of guidelines. It is a contract. It is a social contract. That's what James Madison called it.
Right.
And John Locke called constitutions social contracts. And in a contract, the language and the words based on their original meaning are important, number one. And number two, in contract law, as opposed to any other law in our system, contract law is very simple. It's either in the contract or it's not. So when it comes to federal authorities, as a contract, the question is, do they have the authority regarding guns? No, shall not be infringed. Pretty clear language that every single federal gun law, all of them, including background checks, is unconstitutional,
right,
and illegal. The states have certain allowances when it comes to gun laws, but once again, it's still your right to keep and bear arms, so they're not even supposed to go very far with it, and that's a different discussion. But when it comes to language, for example, the word regulated, when we hear the word regulated today, and we use it in modern language, and we think controlled or restricted by the law, made by government. That's what we think of, and that's the number one definition if you look it up in the dictionary. But if you go back to the language and how they were using that word back during the time of the writing of the Constitution, and if you pull out the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, which is the first American language dictionary that came out, what you find is that control or restriction by law was the least used. The most common was to put in good order. In other words, to make regular, hence the word regulate.
Right.
And so first of all, a well-regulated militia is not one regulated by government. It is a militia that is in good order, and that makes sense. American Revolution, the militia was anything but in good order. As for militia itself, the definition in the U.S. Code is actually clear. There are two classes to the militia. There's an organized militia, which is National Guard, Naval Militia, Air Guard, the state militias, and so forth. Then there's the unorganized militia, which is the rest of us. For me, the best definition of a militia, so that people understand who the militia is, I think the best definition came from George Mason. George Mason said that the militia was the whole of the whole of the people and a few politicians.
Yeah, I've always had discussions with people, and they always get hung up on militia and regulated, and And, the anti-Second Amendment people will always point to regulated as we can do anything we want.
Right.
And I always tell them, go ahead, knock yourself out, regulate the militia all you want, but you shall not infringe, because there's two separate
Well,
thoughts there.
and when it comes to the regulating of the militia, basically what that, like I said, it means to put it in good order. If you read Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution, it states that Congress has the authority to, and they have, make the rules regarding the militia, how they are to train, what the ranks are, if they have uniforms, the whole bit. And then it's left to the states to prescribe those rules and the training and the appointment of officers and all that. And so that's what a militia in good order, a well-regulated militia, is. So we don't need laws in the sense of controlling people or controlling guns. We have the rules set up in the sense of how the militia is supposed to run. And once again, the unorganized militia doesn't really fall under any of those regulations. And I guarantee you, if push came to shove, nobody's going to really care about what the rules and regulations say anyway.
Right.
But that said, when it comes to firearms, one other thing is, once again, going back to that 1828 Webster's Dictionary, if you look up the word bear, remember it says keep and bear arms.
Exactly.
Shall not be infringed. If you look up the word bear in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, one of the examples it uses for the word is a gun inside one's coat. In
Right.
other words, I have a right to concealed carry, so I shouldn't even have to worry about permits. But that's a whole different discussion for another day. But basically, according to the Constitution, every single federal gun law is unconstitutional. None of their business. If a state wants to have a few laws, they can, but once again, they're not supposed to infringe on our right. The way I like to explain it is, if you read a Federalist 45 by James Madison, he discusses this, that the Bill of Rights and the federal Constitution and the federal government's for the external stuff, and the states handle the internal stuff. And that includes our life, our lives, our liberty, and our property and things, our rights. So someone does have the authority to make the law that my 8-year-old granddaughter can't go down to the gun store and buy a gun.
Right.
Someone is authorized to make that law. That's the state. They are authorized to make some laws regarding guns. However, they're still not supposed to infringe on my right. Making certain laws that the people agree on is one thing. To go beyond that, as California has, is a whole different thing. But when it comes to the Bill of Rights, in the preamble of the Bill of Rights, it explains that the Bill of Rights was specifically written to the federal government to protect us against misconstruction and abuse of its powers.
Yeah.
That's the reason for shall not be infringed.
And isn't there, I'm not real great on the Constitution, and I'm actually embarrassed, as I'm sure most Americans don't really understand the Constitution, but
that's why I do the classes.
Exactly. So I'm trying to, learn a little bit more as I can. And I thought I read something recently that the states are allowed, as you said, to pass laws and stuff, but they're not supposed to nullify anything specifically outlined in the Constitution. Is that right? Am I on the right track thinking about that?
Yes, but there's sometimes people get confused, especially when it comes to the Second Amendment. What it says, you're talking about the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause is in Article 6 of the Constitution, and it says that this Constitution, all laws of the United States made in pursuance thereof, and treaties made or shall be made are the supreme law of the land. Then the judges, are supposed to take notice of that, and then it goes on to say that states cannot make laws contrary. Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to the Second Amendment, for example, who's the Constitution talking to? It's talking to the federal government. So the shall not be infringed doesn't apply to the state government. So technically, they're not going contrary because it's not language talking to them. Just for example, in Article 1, Section 9, it states, a few things that the federal government can't do, but in Article 1, Section 10, there's some of those things are not relisted, for the states, because the states can do it. They're not violating the Constitution if they, do something that it tells the federal government it can't do or can do. Mm-hmm. It comes down to authorities, in other words. Now that said, give you an idea here. Immigration is a federal authority according to Article 1, Section 9 and Article 1, Section 8.
Right.
And therefore, sanctuary state laws are actually contrary to immigration laws. Therefore, they're unconstitutional. State can't have a law contrary to laws made pursuant to the Constitution.
Right.
However, there's no authority that gives the federal government any authority over drugs.
Mm-hmm.
So the DEA is actually unconstitutional because there's no authority given to the federal government regarding drugs. That's up to each state. So states can have a law legalizing marijuana. Not that I'm a fan of that, but I'm just going from a legal standpoint here. State can have that law because they're, even though it's contrary to the federal law is unconstitutional. So it's not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. And then that's kind of why all the states have their own state constitutions. So that's interesting.
Right. Well, exactly. There are authorities given the federal government, and then whatever's. It's funny because if it's like I was explaining to someone, if everything in the Constitution applied to the state, then why would they need a state constitution?
Right.
So yeah, exactly. Good observation on your point.
And that brings up another point that the states are supposed to be sovereign, and where we are now, the way our kids have been taught and the way the media and the powers that be give out this perception that the federal government is in charge of everything when it's flipped upside down on its head. The states are supposed to be in charge of everything except for specific things that are in the Constitution that outline how the federal government works. Is that the right way of looking at it too?
Yeah, and I actually went into this in great detail in a video about localism on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Douglas V Gibbs. But in a nutshell, what it was is the states, who used to be colonies, were all different from each other. They were unique, autonomous, individualistic, sovereign states, their own little countries.
Right.
And their attitude was, we take care of our own business. However, once they became a union, United States, there were some issues that the states really couldn't take care of. It needed to be done by an agency that represented the country as a whole, such as trade with other countries, common defense, protecting the trade routes, and things like that. So the idea of writing the Constitution was to create an agency, like a federal government, to handle those issues, those outside issues that the states really couldn't, without a centralized agency, so that the state legislatures and the states would be freed up to handle their local issues.
Right. Kind of almost like a third party mediator in some instances.
Yes. Well, when it came to disputes between the states, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so really, well, it would be like, if you and I and a bunch of other people, formed a nonprofit, but you know what? We're so busy doing what we want to do that we, the money is kind of tough. So what do? We hire an accounting firm. Mm-hmm. And an accounting firm can handle what we delegate to them regarding our accounting. But they can't come in and say, well, you know what? Now we're going to start running your board meetings and we're going to tell you how you're going to run well, no, you can't do that. That's not what you were hired for. You were hired for to handle those issues that frees us up. So same thing with the federal government. It was created to handle those external issues or things that have to do with the unions, that protects and preserves the union, such as communication among the union, which would be the Postal Service, or disputes among the states, to come in as a mediator to resolve those disputes, or to handle the external issues, so that the states don't have to worry about that stuff, and they're not in the middle of squabbles or whatever. They can handle their internal issues.
Right. Oh, that makes sense. So another thing that I was looking at on your website is American Freedom Alliance. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
American Freedom Alliance is a large think tank / organization out of the Los Angeles area, founded by a gentleman by the name of Avi Davis. And he became a friend of mine. What he wanted to do was create a West Coast version of the constitutional studies think tanks that you see on the East Coast.
Okay.
Unfortunately, and so he asked me to come on board. He wanted to make me director of that, and I was made a fellow of the organization. And then he passed away. The organization has, while I'm still an important part of the organization as a fellow, they have kind of moved away from having a Constitution Studies department or division here on the West Coast.
Oh, wow.
That said, I have a recent friendship with Dr. Cordy Williams, who runs an organization called 1776 Forever Free. He's got a similar idea. So I'm probably going to be hopefully directing a constitutional studies think tank that through them. And then, of course, I am still in touch with the American Freedom Alliance. I still help them out, and I do a lot of the constitutional research for a lot of what they do. Once again, they host a lot of events. They have a lot of think tank members that help with, sending out information to groups like the Heritage Foundation, the Republican Party, and so forth, to hopefully move in the right direction. My role has been more of consulting than anything.
Right. I did I looked at a couple things, Freedom Academy that they have, and the Every Business is Essential. Those look like two really good things that they're doing within there too.
It's a great organization, and I'm blessed to be associated with them. I'm working with the chairwoman, or I can't remember if she's president or chairman, one or the other, but Karen Siegman, who she and I are working on a few things, because one of the things I'm wanting to do, and Constitutional Association is actually at the forefront of this, but we're kind of enlisting the help of the American Freedom Alliance, is start moving us back towards being a republic. And one of those things includes reversing the 1964 Reynolds v. Sims, which changed how the state senators are put into office.
Right.
State senators used to be appointed by the county leadership instead of being voted in, and rather than gerrymandered districts, it was one per county regardless of population. Could you imagine what California State Senate would look like if it was only one per county?
Yeah.
Instead of 8 counties, comprising the rural district, Senate District 2, while LA County has like 13 districts.
Yeah, I just this is one of the things that I wanted to lay into Dale about, was how come the GOP makes zero effort to regain California. I mean, it's 20% of the electoral college.
They don't think there's a chance.
And that's guaranteeing
I'm a
losses.
Believer.
Sorry to interrupt.
Let me say this. I'm a firm believer that California is actually very red,
yes,
and it has been since Reagan. And now that we know that the voter fraud is as bad as it is, I believe, and I've been saying this even before the voter fraud stuff came up, that they've been stealing the elections ever since Reagan.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you 100%.
In this state, we have more Christians in the state than any other state, and we have more registered gun owners in the state than any other state except for Texas.
Yeah, I agree.
And yet we're voting this way? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think California has been the petri dish for methods of stealing elections for decades, and I think that all of that came out to the forefront in this 2020 election. I think they went to California and said, "We need some help, guys."
Absolutely.
I mean, I was blown away by all of the excitement. I went to several rallies for President Trump before the election, and the turnout and the excitement, and it just, even the people driving by on the street were thumbs up, and it was like such like widespread support. I was like, man, he might actually win California, and a lot of people think he did. Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. Matter of fact, there's a map that came out of the server out of Germany where they were counting the votes, and the original map shows California as red.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I think we really need to. We're farther along than we think in accomplishing that goal, but I think that needs to be something that we can do as citizens to take back our government. And the first step is California. And back to my point I made earlier about everything being turned upside down on its head. It seems like everybody, and you alluded to this earlier about affecting change at the local level. I think that's so important. Everybody thinks, we want President Trump to come in at the top level of the federal government and change everything and save us all, when our government was built to be operated from the ground up. It's like riding a bicycle backwards. It's not how it works. We need to do it from the ground up. And one example I give to people is in Riverside County, we got our new sheriff, Chad Bianco. And the old sheriff, Stanley Sniff, it took years to get concealed carry. Now with Chad Bianco, it takes like 3-4 months to get a concealed carry.
Right. That's what he ran on too, by the way.
Yes, and I voted for him. I voted for him.
I've actually known him. I've known him personally for years, and in fact, the Constitution Association. Remember when I said we got formed in 2014? He was our very first speaker in 2014.
Awesome. Well, it's just an example.
May of 2014. So I've known him a long time, and we're blessed with this sheriff. But the thing is, and I knew Stan Sniff actually quite well. And I was at a gun show one time. I had a booth at a gun show for years. Don't do it anymore because I don't have that kind of time anymore.
Right.
And he says to me one time, I just don't understand these people who think they should be able to own a gun just because they were born in America. I'm like, dude, you know who you're talking to, right?
Oh my gosh. Well, I always use that as a great example of how local government matters many times more than the federal or the big picture across the nation federal government, because we never would have got that Second Amendment right restored to us from Washington or even Sacramento, So we actually affected Riverside County in the biggest way possible just by electing a sheriff. And I think that's something that the conversation needs to shift from who's going to be president, who's going to be senator, to who's going to be your even your local council, city council member. We need to focus a lot more on that. And the conversation never goes that way, at least with people that I talk to.
I've been teaching for decades that change begins locally.
Yes.
And the saying that I have created that people get a kick out of, but it really, I think, explains it well enough, is we complain about the cockroaches in Washington, but we breed them locally.
Exactly. So, just to change the subject real here, what kind of sparked your interest in the Constitution and your passion for teaching? How did that all come about? Is it just something you were born with, or were there things that one thing led to another and sparked your interest along a journey, so to speak?
Well, I joke with people, and I tell people that I'm born in Southern California, and I've always been very constitutionally minded. So when I was born, I had a surfboard under one arm and a Constitution under the other. But my parents were actually Democrats at the time. I was conservative before they were. But Reagan did it for them. And I tell everybody I'm a Reagan baby. I voted for Reagan as president when I first could vote. That was my age, my generation.
Right.
And that was my first presidential election. I was able to vote for Reagan. So I call myself a Reagan baby. But now that all said, what it was really is I've always had, first of all, an interest in history. Mm-hmm. And I've always been, and I grew up as a Christian. I grew up in the church. So I've always had a Christian value mindset and worldview. And so with those things already in place, when I was a young lad, and there was a thing called Schoolhouse Rock, which were these, after school and Saturday, morning things on KABC. And I just loved those things. They sparked my interest. And
I'm just a Bill.
Was about yeah, exactly. And one of them was about the preamble. And I'll be honest, for the first 2 years of learning how to restate the preamble, I couldn't do it without singing.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, it sparked my interest. So I asked my mom. I wanted to learn more about this stuff. So I was getting books on it and going to the library and things like that. And by the time I was 15, I fancied myself a pretty informed and constitutionalist. I really didn't do anything with it in my life. I served in the United States Navy. I got married. I lived my took care of my family. So I really didn't do anything with it. Then in 2008, when Barack Obama was the Democratic candidate, and it looked like he was going to be at that point, I was knocking on doors for a congressional candidate. Republican in my area, and the woman and I that were knocking on doors together, we get to talking, and by the end of the day, she says, I've never come across anybody who knows the Constitution like you. You really know your Constitution. I'm like, well, thanks. I've never really done anything with it, but thanks. Then she says, well, there's this new Tea Party in town, and I bet they would want to talk to you. I think they're going to have an event, and they're going to be handing out pocket constitutions. Wouldn't it be great if you were there to answer questions as they were being handed out? I'm like, yeah, okay, that sounds great.
Very
so I met
cool.
with the Tea Party people. The following Saturday, I was there. I handed them out, and that same lady helped me out. And at the end of the day, she says, you know what? you know the Constitution so well, you should teach classes. And I said, okay. I never intended to do it.
Right.
And 2 weeks later, she contacted me, told me she had talked to the local gun shop. I could use their classroom. And in 2008, February of 2008, the Constitution class in Temecula began. And for the first 6 months, it was horrible. I'd never done it before. I was just, it was more of a tea party meeting than it was a class.
Right.
And it took me about 6 months to realize I was losing people because I really wasn't teaching the Constitution. And I decided I should just go through it line by line. And that's what I started doing. And I've been doing it ever since.
I love how God works in that, you know, he'll put you the proverbial turtle on a fence post type of a thing where like all of a sudden you look down and it's like, how did I get here? And it's great how God will do things like that where nobody can take the credit but him. It's like, I put you in this position and here you are, be faithful in it. I think that's awesome.
Well, I tell people this is the ministry that God has given me. I recognize it as such. And what's funny is when I was in high school, I actually, and you're going to laugh when you hear this, I wanted to be one of two things. Either I wanted to be a minister or a lawyer. You talk about opposite ends of the spectrum here.
That's bipolar right
there. and in fact, on the back of my Letterman's jacket, I had a descending dove. And but for some reason, I thought it would be a much better idea to get my girlfriend pregnant, marry her, and enlist in the Navy. And now, 36 years later, we're still married, high school sweethearts. We have 2 children, 7 grandchildren.
Wow.
And first 21 years of our marriage was a pretty rough ride. But then she came forward and accepted Christ in 2005. 21 years into our marriage.
Oh, very cool.
Once we were evenly yoked, the relationship took off to the positive. Unfortunately, we'd already raised our kids, and they were damaged from our fighting for 21 years. But one of them stayed with the foundation I tried to lay, and the other one didn't for the longest time. But a year ago, he went forward and accepted Christ. So now I've got both of my children back too. So it all worked out in the end. But all that said, that journey. People say, well, Doug, don't you wish you would have been doing these classes and stuff when you were younger and you'd have more time? And I said, no, because I wasn't that person back then. God had to put me through the ringer that I went through in order to become the guy I am now, the Constitution teacher. So, and I look back and I think to myself, gosh, I wanted a ministry when I was in high school. I wanted to be a minister, but God said, no, I want to give you a different ministry, but we got to put you through a tough set of trials first to get there.
Yeah, we got to put the fire on you to take the dross out, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got a few testimonies, that just people are amazed at that I've gone through, but that's the journey I needed to take. That's what God wanted me to go through, and I'm the guy I am now because of that, and I appreciate my Constitution and my country and my wife and the things that I have much more because of the journey I took. And it's made me a better, individual for fighting for the Constitution as a result. But it really was something that, while it's always been an interest to me, I never really intended to write books and do classes. I started a blog in 2006, thepoliticalpistachio.com. 2007, I started doing online radio. 2008, I started teaching the classes. In 2011, I started AM radio. And then 2014, I published my first book. And none of those things I'd ever intended.
Wow, that's very cool. Tell us about the classes that you offer, what the cost is involved, where the locations, and how people can get signed up for them.
All right. Well, they're my own classes, and you don't necessarily need to sign up. You need to show up, but I just work my way through the Constitution line by line. Whether we're at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the Constitution, you're going to learn something every session.
Right.
And you can start any time. When I get to the end of the Constitution, I just start over. Now, that said, for the one in Temecula, because it's right down the street from where I live, I have a donation bucket. And right now it's being taught at the 412 Murrieta Church at 5 o'clock on Wednesday nights. Now, I just moved it to 5 from 5:30. I haven't changed the website yet, but it is at 5 o'clock. All the other locations, I ask for a $10 charge because I'm driving a heck of a distance and,
Right.
and printing, printouts and all that. So I want to make sure that it's not costing me more than I've got coming in. Otherwise, my wife would, whack me upside the head. So Beaumont on Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock at Marla's. It's a restaurant right there off of 6th and Pennsylvania.
Right.
In Beaumont, and it's Marla's. It doesn't open till 11, but we're rocking and rolling at 10.
Awesome.
They serve us breakfast if you want it. I think it's like $10 for basic different like 3 possible breakfasts. In the back room, and then after the class is over, I stay for lunch. So if you want to talk and ask questions or whatever, have lunch with me, and we'll talk. And then on Thursday night, I'm in Carlsbad at the chiropractor's office down in Carlsbad off of Jefferson and the 78 freeway. That one's a $10 door charge to get in. Also, that one also has a Zoom, so you can watch it on Zoom. They charge $10, so they can pay for the extra large Zoom package they had to buy for it.
Oh, wow.
And then you get on an email list, and they'll send you the Zoom link each week as it changes each week. And that's and when I say they, it's 1776 Forever Free, and Dr. Cordy Williams, and we're working together on also a few other things. I am in touch with, because of him, people like Mike Lindell, Lynn Wood, and so forth. And so I'm pretty excited because we're getting ready to expand what I've been doing for years into
Very
something much larger than it has been. So, God decided that Dr. Cordy and I needed to get to know each other, and he's the rah-rah guy. I'm the info guy, and between the two of us, I think we do a pretty good job.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I wrote that down earlier. I want to check that 1776 thing out. I wrote it down.
Now, I do have classes that are one in Fallbrook that should be starting in the next few weeks. We haven't gotten a location yet. There's 40 people in Fallbrook that have asked for a class. And then I'm talking to a group in Orange County and another group down in the city of San Diego as well regarding starting up classes. So the Orange County one, we're looking at anywhere from one group wants it in Yorba Linda, another group wants it in Huntington Beach, another group wants it in San Clemente. So we're not really sure yet on the Orange County one.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's my whole thing that kind of prompted me to start doing this podcast is education, and not that I'm a great educator, but more I wanted to educate myself. And I knew if I started doing this, I would be forced to do my research, because I'm not just going to come out and say something without knowing, at least having a good idea what I'm talking about and giving accurate information. The name of the podcast is Political Truths 832. And the 832 is a reference to a Bible verse, John 8:32, that says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free." So I am on board with you as far as like education is the most important part of what we need to do in this country. There's all kinds of other stuff that needs to be done, but without that, it's going to be an exercise in futility. People have to know the truth, and that's great that you're out there.
Go ahead and check out Galatians 5:1 while you're at it.
Yes.
That's one of my favorites. I can't recite it off the top of my head. I got to pull my Bible out, but but it's one of my favorites. And Galatians 5:1, basically, it talks about the yoke of liberty and breaking from bondage. Right. Is really what it's about. And I've always been God-centric in what I do. And I think that's one of the reasons why people have responded, because while I'm not necessarily preaching, I'm really push the fact that, if we're not a godly country, we're not capable of the Constitution. Right. Our natural rights come to us from God. And while right and wrong is supposed to be self-evident, it says so in the Declaration of Independence, it isn't self-evident to everybody. Right. Our natural rights, what rights are right and wrong, rule of law, all of that jazz is only self-evident if we are a godly people. Right. And so when I talk about to people about blame for how we got to where we got, I tell people that you need to look in 2 places. Number 1, look in the mirror. Yes. Because we allowed this. Number 2, we look to our churches, because our pastors have fallen for the separation of church and state lie, and the don't talk religion and politics lie. And we need more pastors that are getting up there on the pulpit and saying, we need to fight for our liberty. We need to understand that not only was Jesus involved in politics, he shook up politics. The Sadducees and Pharisees. He took on the political elite of the day. God
Right.
was involved in politics. Jesus was involved in politics. Jesus is involved in politics. And as Christians, it is our duty and our obligation to do so as not only patriots, but knowing what we know. If we're not active, if we're not involved, it's a sin of omission.
Yeah. And the Bible states very clearly that any foundation that is not laid on the rock of Jesus Christ, that's, I butchered that, but the thought is any foundation that you lay in your life on any given subject, if it's not on the rock of Christ, it's going to fall. And
Right.
why would that not apply to our form of government in this country? Of course it applies to that. People that think that it's separate, you can't build a government without the foundation of Christ. And our founders even talked about that our form of government is wholly, I can't remember the quote, wholly unfit for a non-religious and moral society or something to that effect. And they knew it wouldn't, we couldn't sustain it. So, that's very cool information. It's good to hear all the stuff you got going on and your personal walk with God and how he's put you in these situations. And like I said before, I love how he does things in a way that we can't take credit for. Anything that we do that's worthwhile, ultimately we have to give it back to him because we play a part.
We think in our minds. We think, I expect God to do this. I think God to do that. And he never does it the way we imagine.
Yes, thank God.
But it always turns out to be better in the long run.
Yes.
You're like, whoa, God, I didn't see that one coming, but that was cool. Thanks.
Yep. And it makes it that much more fun for us. It's like,
right.
So anyway, moving on to, originally when I contacted you through the emails, I said I had questions about the Constitution, and here we are 50 minutes into it, and I haven't really gotten into that, but that's, again.
Yeah, it's funny. People talk to me, and it winds up being a long conversation. Funny how that works out, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's funny because we live in a society where everybody wants everything short and quick,
right.
But people don't mind the fact that my videos are a little longer because they want to know this stuff. So I think we're okay.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I mentioned in one of the emails that I was going to question you or ask you about the Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905. And could we, looking at the COVID and everything that's going on, are they ready to whack us over the head with that? And can that come back and bite us? What are your views on that? Are they going to be able to mandate vaccinations on us if we don't want it? Right. Are they going to push us into that?
I had I've been familiar with the case, but I'd never written on it before. Uh-huh. And so when you brought it up in the email, I decided to write an article about it. So, I believe it was either early this morning or yesterday, one or the other, where I posted it.
Awesome.
But and no, thank you, because I always need people saying, hey, what about this? Because sometimes I get locked in the way I write and I forget about, going in certain directions that people want to hear. So I always appreciate when people give me suggestions like that.
Awesome.
But the thing is, first of all, when it comes to the courts, understand that there's nothing in the Constitution that gives them the authority to interpret the law or to interpret the Constitution. Mm-hmm. What they're supposed to do is apply the law as it's written to the cases they hear. And then when it comes to constitutionality, give their opinion, but it's really up to the legislatures on whether or not to change something. Now, that all said, what our host here has brought up, what Brian has talked about when it comes to Jacobson versus Massachusetts, is there was a law, Massachusetts law, that basically required smallpox vaccinations because there was a smallpox epidemic going on in the Northeast during the first half dozen years there of the 20th century. And a pastor and his son refused to take the inoculation and refused to pay the fine that was the consequence of refusing to be inoculated with this vaccine of a weakened, basically, smallpox germ. He believed that putting making one sick, putting unhealthiness into a healthy body was against his right to liberty, right. Among other things. And he had past problems with inoculations anyway, and so he felt, his individual liberty should give him the choice. And the courts came back and said that your liberty really don't matter when it comes to the common good. If it's a public emergency and we're trying to protect the community, individualism goes out the window. That's essentially what they said.
Why does that sound
And
so familiar?
and so now the question is, will they be pulling this out of the mothballs for this COVID-19 scamdemic? Absolutely, and probably, because, and this idea of collectivism over individual liberty, this idea of the community, hey, we're all in this together through the government, is a socialist, communist, Marxist idea.
Yep.
And individual, it's just like, you want to know the difference between individual liberty and collectivism and Christianity versus secularism? It's real easy. You look at the American Revolution, which was based on individualism and a Christian God, and what you got was the greatest country in history of the world. Mm-hmm. The French Revolution, they modeled their revolution after ours, but they made two changes. They went from individualism to collectivism and Christianity to secularism. When you base your revolution on secularism and collectivism, you get the French Revolution, which wound up leading to more tyranny. Yep. So there's your difference. And really, so this whole thing with Jacobson versus Massachusetts and the scamdemic and whether or not they should be able to force us to wear a mask or force us to get a vaccine for the quote-unquote common good, it reminds me, first of all, of the idea of the general will, which was something that Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Alexander Hamilton, the first being behind the French Revolution, the other being the lefty in the Constitutional Convention. General will is the will of the people that the people don't understand. But don't worry, the political elite recognize it, know how to interpret it, and must apply it, even if it means putting you in jail because you need to, and I quote, this is what Rousseau said, because sometimes man must be forced to be free. You want to talk about Orwellian.
Yeah.
This is what we're up against. So it's really individual liberty versus collectivism is ultimately what it is. And the question is simply this. Should you, as an individual, be able to assess the risks yourself and make your own decisions, or should government do it for you?
Absolutely.
Regardless of the situation, regardless of the danger. It's like seatbelt laws. Yes. I don't disagree we should wear seatbelts, but I don't agree with seatbelt laws. That should be my decision.
It's not the role of the government.
And then decide.
It's not the role of the government, basically.
Right. It's not the role of the government to sit there and say, well, we need to protect you from yourself.
Yeah.
So in the spirit of the Constitution, Jacobson versus Massachusetts and this idea of a vaccination mandate, very, very unconstitutional. Goes completely against the whole spirit of what liberty is about and what this country is about, and so it's very problematic. And I'm gonna tell you right now, they'll have to arrest me. I will not take their vaccination, especially now that I've seen what the second dose has been doing to people.
Right, and
there's three of them, and there's three different vaccines.
Yes,
they have not isolated the virus. Mm-hmm. They have created three vaccines with on a guessing game. It's like you're on. I'm serious. It's like you're on. Let's make a deal. Do you want door number 1, door number 2, or door number 3? Yeah. Or you could have what's in the envelope in my hand, and you say, "Oh, I'll take door number 2." So they shoot your arm with the vaccine. You get sick. You almost die, or you could die. Well, what was in your hand, that I didn't take with the envelope? Oh, that you wouldn't die.
Yeah. I got to tell you, it was.
I feel like we're playing this game show with these vaccines, and normally it takes 3 to 5 years to create a vaccine.
Right.
I love Donald Trump, absolutely adore him as president, but the Operation Warp Speed to push a vaccine as quick as possible was not a good idea.
Yeah, I tell you, it was a punch in the gut for me when I started doing some research, and because my initial thought was there's no way the government would ever have the right to force me to do that. And then your mind goes to the inoculation for kids to enter school. But I just dug a little deeper, and that's where I found the Jacobson versus Massachusetts. And I'm like, holy crap, they've already ruled on this, and they ruled against the people. And that was a punch in the gut to me, because I'm like, they're going to do this.
And the language by Chief Justice John Marshall Harlan, I mean, he does not beat around the bush, man. Yeah. It's, hey, you must be compelled kind of thing.
Yeah, that.
And and it's funny when you talk about the kids being inoculated, because see, right now kids are not in school.
Uh-huh.
They're going to school on their computers at home.
And they're still required.
I
Yes.
have, yeah, I have 7 grandkids. 3 of them live in my house with me, and they're all 3, on their computers every morning, during the week, to go to school.
Yes.
My son was just advised that his oldest, his son, one of his vaccines has expired. He needs to get a new shot. If he doesn't get a new shot, he can't go to school anymore. Virtual school where he's not around anybody.
Well, he might
Think
get a
about that first.
computer virus or something, right?
I mean, and of course, if you don't get him inoculated, and so he can stay in school, and he's not in school, then you're in trouble for not having a kid in school. So thank you, American bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And that's what we're up against, and it's this circular thinking by bureaucrats that really all goes back to the general will.
Yes.
There's a will of the people that you can't recognize, but don't worry, the ruling elite's got it for you, and we'll make sure we put it in place.
And you should be grateful to have us.
Be grateful to have it. We're just trying to protect the community anyway, despite what you think your liberty should be.
Yeah, it's
think you
crazy.
own property, don't pay your property taxes. See what happens.
Yeah, it's just crazy. The whole world's upside down right now. So
Right.
to shift gears and go into another topic here on the Constitution, like I said, my main goal is educate myself, educate anybody that I can. And it seems like we're always, one of the hot topics of today is obviously racism or race relations and slavery. And, I've been told, I haven't ever researched this for myself, that there were discussions in the Constitutional Convention about trying to get rid of slavery, but the Southern states weren't going to have anything to do with it. And so
that was a part of it, and it also went against the idea of what the federal government and the Constitution was about. See, George Mason was one of 3 persons that were there for the entire convention, and that at the end of the convention refused to sign the Constitution for 2 reasons. Number 1, it didn't have Bill of Rights, and number 2, it didn't outlaw slavery.
Okay.
Slavery was a big issue. If you read the original draft of the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson wrote, he was a big-time abolitionist, despite what the historical revisionists will tell you.
Right.
And he wrote at the end of the list of grievances a scathing rebuke of slavery, and accusing the king and the British Empire of bringing slavery to the colonies and pushing it in those colonies. And he even reminds the king in his scathing rebuke that Virginia as a colony at one point tried to outlaw slavery,
Yes.
and the British Crown wouldn't let them.
And see, this is my point too, is that we are, like I said, I just did an episode on the language of the left and how they twist everything around and we accept their terms, and we can't do that anymore. I've been talking about this with people. There was an abolitionist movement before the United States was a thing. It predated the United States. And so everybody wants to talk about slavery. Fine, let's talk about it. It was horrible. It was a crime against humanity. Nobody ever disputes that. But let's tell the whole story. Because it's not like Abraham Lincoln woke up one day, finished his eggs and bacon, and said, you know what, Mary, I don't care what all those racist white Americans think. I'm going to abolish slavery. I don't care what they say. No, everybody knew who Lincoln was and what he was for when he got elected. And I bring up the Northwestern Ordinance of 1789 or 1787, and that was 2 years before the ratification of the Constitution, if I'm right about that. And within the Northwestern Ordinance, there was a provision that any state that came out of this territory would be prohibited from having slavery. This is before the foundation of the American government. So we need to educate people and have this conversation, but let's talk about the whole thing.
Well, and we get this idea that, slavery was just a majority idea and all white people owned slaves and so on and so forth. So let me quell some of that first of all. Okay, so going back to the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, that anti-slavery language was removed on July 1st, 1776, because 2 states said they wouldn't sign it if it was there, South Carolina and Georgia. The other 11 states, and that included the Carolinas, Virginia, those horrible slave states, approved of that language. It was only those 2 states, 2 out of 13, that kept that language from being in there. So it was a minority opinion, but They
Right.
wanted it to be unanimous, so they took the language out. Thomas Jefferson also not only was a big time abolitionist, and he would come back from trips overseas, and his slaves loved him so much because he treated them like family that they would run to the bottom of the hill to pick him up and carry him on their shoulders up to the house. There's stories that he would go by slave auctions sometimes. He would realize, and this happened I think twice, where he realized that families were going to be split up by different people buying different parts of the family.
Yeah.
So he would buy the whole family to keep the family together.
Wow.
All right. And then he got Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin founded and was president of the first anti-slavery organization in the United States once we became a country. It was called the Society of Friends.
Mm-hmm.
These stories are not out there. Or how about this one, the 1860 census? This is the last census right before the beginning of the war between the states. In the United States as a whole, the entire country, the percentage of free white people who owned slaves was 1.7%.
Wow.
In the southern states, the states that would secede later, the percentage of free white people who owned slaves in the southern states that seceded, 4.9%. Less than 5% of the free white people in the South owned slaves.
Yeah.
What we're taught, they all did was this, epidemic was out of control, right? Then here's something else that you find out from that census. In the South at that time, there were free blacks.
Mm-hmm.
And of the free black population, 27% owned slaves.
Wow.
Now, these are statistics, and these are things you don't hear.
Yeah.
We don't hear this because we don't know history anymore. They're covering up history.
That's right.
They want to cover up history because, number one, they don't want you to know that they've been lying to you, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, because when it comes to our mistakes like slavery or something like that, they don't want you to know the details, and also they understand this. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. They
Right.
want to repeat certain parts of history.
Yeah.
They don't want you to know what happened because they want it to be repeated.
Yeah, that's I've got big plans for future podcasts that I'm currently just starting the baby steps of researching, and the abolition movement is one of those topics that I really want to.
Well, one of my books, I have an entire chapter on slavery.
Awesome.
And I explain how the framers, the founders, were largely abolitionists. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say they were all were. Yeah, of course there were slave owners, and and many of them were, and some of them who were slave owners were abolitionists, and some of them were like not apologetic about the fact that they owned slaves. And I'll tell you one guy who owned slaves and was very vicious slave master, Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
The father of the Democratic Party. Just saying.
Yeah. That's another thing. It's interesting how the leftists will say that America is irredeemable because of slavery, and yet the Democrat Party, I always say this to people, that we're not a racist country, and our history is not racist. The history of our nation is good people fighting the Democratic Party. That's the history of our nation. And it's interesting that the country is irredeemable, but the Democrat Party, they are now the purveyors of equality, and the party, I don't know how that happened.
And they'll tell you that the parties switched in the 60s.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
And my first thing about that is, well, if the party switched in the 60s, and they say all the Dixiecrats, the racist Democrats, went to the Republican Party, during the 60s, 2 Democrats went over to the Republican Party. 2.
Yes. Not
exactly the mass, migration of Democrats, racist Democrats to the Republican Party. They want you to believe, number one. Number two, if the parties switched in the 60s, and that's why the South started voting Republican, because they're a bunch of racists, then why is it the South didn't start voting Republican until the 90s?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you just think about that, the premise of that argument is so illogical that somehow the Southern Democrats were upset that the new Democrats coming up through the ranks weren't racist enough. So they decided, let's go to the party that freed the slaves because the guys we got here aren't quite racist enough. Is completely illogical just on its foundation. It doesn't make any sense.
But see, But see, they know something that a lot of Americans don't realize.
Yes.
Tell a lie often enough, it becomes the truth, no
Yeah,
matter how illogical the lie is.
that's true. So are there could you recommend some references to learn more about the Constitutional Convention? That's something I'm really interested in. Did they take minutes or notes, or did some of the founders
Absolutely.
write books?
Three persons during the Constitutional Convention took notes.
Okay.
One of them was James Madison. If you go to the Avalon Project, and Avalon Project is a website put out by Yale University. Yes, Yale University actually did something right, and everything else they do wrong, but they did this right. A website is pretty much all of your historical documents online. And if you go to the right time period, and you look up James Madison's notes on the Federal Convention, you can read his notes on the convention of each day that they argued and talked and all that other stuff. Another gentleman who took notes, his last name was Lyons, Lyons. His notes were consulted when John Taylor wrote the book in 1823, A New View of the Constitution of the United States, which is also a very good book for understanding the Constitutional Convention. Then there, of course, there is Catherine Drinker Bowen's book, The Miracle at Philadelphia. Catherine, that's with a C, Drinker, like a drinker, someone who drinks too much. Bowen, Bowen. Her book was A Miracle at Philadelphia. I think it's quite well done. There's also books on Jefferson by Dumas Malone. It's a 6-book series, Dumas Malone, about Jefferson, which really helps. And then, of course, there are the books that the National Center of Constitutional Studies have put out. There's one on Washington, there's one on Madison, there's another one on Jefferson. These books also were done quite well. There's a number of other books, but those are, I guess, would be the top ones. And of course, there's my books. So I've written 7 books. 6 of them are centered on the U.S. Constitution. The other one is about abortion.
Okay.
And my first book, for those who are beginners who want to learn about the Constitution, I am told by my readers, this is the book to start with, 25 Myths of the United States Constitution.
Awesome. I'll go ahead and put that up on the screen when I do my editing. I'll put that up there.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
Okay, that's awesome.
And if you need more, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Folks, not just our host, but all of you out there.
Right.
You can email me at constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com. That's my public one for everybody who wants to talk to me. Constitutionspeaker@yahoo.com, and ask questions, ask for recommendations for reading, ask whatever you want, and I'll try to get back to you. Now, I do get a lot of emails, so it may not be instant. Sometimes it'll take 3, 4, 5, 6 days, just simply because I get over 1,000 emails a day, and when you're teaching as many classes as I do and answering as many phone calls as I do, sometimes it takes a while to get back to email.
Yes, that's totally understandable. That's good information. I'm so glad that I have a chance to talk to you.
You're very welcome. I'm going to give you one more.
Yes.
I'm going to give you one more reference, and this is probably the best of all of them.
Okay.
Because it's also online, but it's a 5-book set, 5-volume set called The Founders Constitution. The Founders Constitution goes through the 7 articles and the first 12 amendments. And what it does, and you can also look it up online, and it's available online for free. Liberty Fund, I think, is the publisher and the funder behind it. And what it does is, let's say you're looking up the First Amendment and you go, I'm going to look up freedom of speech. It will list every document, discussion, congressional meeting that had to do with freedom of speech.
Oh, wow.
Letters to the editor, all kinds of stuff.
That's very cool. So I did want to ask a couple more things.
Sure.
If you have time, I know we've been talking for a while, but.
It's funny because you picked the perfect day.
My
wife's at work. My son and his kids are at the beach. It's just me and the dogs and you.
That's awesome. Very cool. My lucky day. Awesome. Our lucky day for everybody that's watching too. So there are a lot of people out there, including myself, who are pointing to the idea that Pennsylvania and Georgia and some of the other battleground states violated not only their own state's constitution, but the United States Constitution by changing voting procedures without going through the legislative branch. So those elections were basically unconstitutional then, right?
Right. Absolutely. What they violated in the federal constitution is Article 1, Section 4. And here, let me open up. I'm opening up so I can give you the exact language that's there.
Very good.
People who know me know I always have a constitution at hand somewhere.
As should we all, right?
It's on my desk. Yeah. All right. So Article 1, Section 4. The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof. Only the legislature is supposed to do the manners of prescription and procedures. Now, notice it said senators and representatives. It doesn't say anything about president. That's because the people didn't vote for president. The electors did.
Right.
Our whole electoral college is fouled up. However, based on that, it's basically saying federal elections.
Right.
So the presidential election really kind of fits under that. Federal elections are supposed to only, the manners and procedures are only supposed to be by the state legislature. And then Congress may, if they feel necessary, pass laws if they need to adjust those regulations. There's no mention of the courts. There's no mention of the Secretary of State. There's no mention of the governor. So if the Secretary of State, governor, or the courts are making changes to the manners and procedures of the election, it's unconstitutional. Yep. In each of those states, the rules were changed by the state Secretary of State and governors in each of those states, and not only that, but also, and we have to ask ourselves this, and I'm very serious, and people at first they're bothered by this because we have democracy so shoved down our throat we don't understand how dangerous it can be.
Yes.
Where in the Constitution does it allow for the people to vote for president? It doesn't.
Yeah.
The electors vote for president, and they are supposed to be appointed by the state legislatures. Why? Because the federal government isn't there to serve the people, it's there to serve the states.
Right.
Remember, it handles the external stuff.
Yeah.
You don't want the federal government involved in your lives, your personal lives, so why would you be the one voting them in?
Right.
They're there to serve the states. Federal government's there, the president is there to take care of the external issues so the states can worry about local issues.
Right.
Now that said, the people's voice is in that government, House of Representatives originally. And the consent of the governed was based on the money. Who has the power of the purse strings? The House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. So if the federal government was doing something the people didn't like, starve it of money, it stops. The people have the ultimate power with the House, which also answers the question, what do you think the founders would think about a government shutdown? And my response is, that was the point.
Yes. Yeah, that's good stuff right there. Kind of opens up another can of worms. I probably shouldn't go too far down.
You and I could talk for weeks and weeks and weeks and never get tired.
Yeah,
That's okay. If ever you want me back, you let me know.
I see a beautiful friendship in the budding stages here, hopefully, at least on my end. That's what I'm hoping for.
Very good, very good. Well, anytime I meet a new patriot and they're hungry for the info and and they love this country and they love our God, I'm excited because I love expanding. Because right now, for me, people ask, well, how are we going to turn around this country? And I've always believed the first step is we need to know. If we don't know what we don't know, we can't fight. We can't do the fight. We have to understand. We have to know. And that's where it begins. Yeah,
I agree. And all of that you were just talking about with the role of the federal government and local governments in electing,
right.
It's crossed my mind that, and it goes back to how do we change California? It just doesn't seem right that the winner takes all method for choosing electors in the states. And I know there's Nebraska and Maine.
Nothing constitutional about that either.
Yeah, Nebraska and Maine do it the way I think it should be done, or similar. Right. There's slight differences between the two, but for instance, each congressional district or each seat that belongs to the people doesn't belong to the person who occupies it. That seat belongs to the people of that district. And that each seat gets one electoral vote. So why should people in just if you go Democrat versus Republican, people in a Republican district who elected a Republican congressman or woman to sit in that seat that they own, that the people own, why should they be forced to submit to another form or the rest of the population? That's theirs. That's their seat. It doesn't belong to anybody else.
First of all, the electoral districts are slightly different than the House of Representatives districts because there's 2 more electors than there are members of the House. Why? Because the electors are based on the number of 2 senators plus members of the House. So those districts, if they were set up, would be different.
And I can see
slightly than the House. Now that said,
yes,
originally the electors, remember, they were appointed by the state legislature, not by the parties. See, right now what's happening is the Republican Party chooses electors and the Democrat Party chooses electors, and then depending on who wins that state, those are the electors that go vote.
Right.
That's not the way it's supposed to be. The state legislature, according to the Constitution, chooses the electors. So right there, we're already in unconstitutional ground.
Right.
Then those electors who represent their electoral district vote, and the president gets that elector vote.
And it
regardless of what the rest of the state does.
And it makes
so there
sense.
Were times in the early presidential elections where 4 different candidates might get electors from a particular state.
Right. Well, it makes sense to me, like the senators to get the popular vote electorally, because the 2 senators represent the whole state. So that kind of makes sense.
But that's actually wrong too.
Oh, really?
17th Amendment, but that's a different discussion.
Yeah, I knew I was going to open up a can of worms there, but I've always thought that was just not the right way to go. When did that all take place? It wasn't always like that, right? It was something.
Yeah, originally the senators were appointed by the states, state legislatures. The 1913, the 17th Amendment. 1913, by the way, is right in the middle of an era known as the Progressive Era, so no surprise there. They changed it from being appointed to being elected by the people, which actually violates also Article 5, but and also Article 1, Section 4. There's all kinds of screwy stuff going on there. But anyway, here's the idea. See, we don't want pure democracy. The purpose of the Constitution was a proper distribution of power. So you don't want the president to have too much power. You don't want the Congress to have too much power. You don't want the judges to have too much power. You don't want the federal government to have too much power. You don't want the states to have too much power. Well, guess what? You also don't want the people to have too much power, because if we have too much power, we mess it up too.
Right.
So it's a distribution of power. Some power goes here, some power goes there. So nobody has too much, so that nobody can take control and do something stupid.
Right.
Therefore, we're not supposed to be a pure democracy. Our democratic vote was only a portion of the system. Mm-hmm. Well, who's the other constituencies? If the people don't have all this power, then where does the other power go? Well, the other constituent are the states.
Yes.
They're the ones that created the federal government through their delegates at the convention. So they set themselves up to have a voice through the Senate. And it makes sense. If you're going to create a Frankenstein monster, you're going to want to have a chance to be there in the process to make sure they behave themselves. Mm-hmm. That's why the Senate has the job of ratifying treaties, because if you're going to have someone ratifying the treaties, who would you want to do it? The people who created the monster, the states, so they can keep that monster under control. Mm-hmm. So that's why they confirm the nominations. It was the state's voice, the state legislature's voice, really. So you have the voice of state legislatures in the Senate and the voice of the people in the House. And that makes sense, because if you look back in history, the most successful bicameral Congresses were of 2 houses that were different from each other.
Right.
The Roman Republic was very successful until the Caesars got in there. And it was successful because the assembly was the voice of the people. The Senate was the voice of the politically powerful, the wealthy, and all that. 2 different houses looking at things from a different point of view. Same thing with the parliamentary system in Britain. You have the House of Commons, you have the House of Lords. They're different.
Yeah.
By changing the Senate to vote by the people, our 2 houses have become the same.
Yeah.
They're representing the same folks. Wow. Why have 2 separate houses if they're, for the most part, the same? The point was for the Senate to be the voice of the states, a different voice.
Right.
so that it would check the people and the people would check the states, and together they could check the federal government.
Huh. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that concept a whole lot.
Now
I've heard it mentioned before, but
let's take it a step further real quick. Just real quick, if you don't mind. Because
yes.
most people, their jaws hit the ground after they hear what I'm getting ready to say. So it's 2 per state in the Senate, appointed by the state legislatures, not voted in.
Right.
Well, guess what? It used to be the state Senate was the same way. It was 1 per county, appointed by the county leadership, not voted in. Now, in 1964, Alabama was sued for doing it that way because it wasn't very democratic. Because we're supposed to be a democracy according to these people.
Right.
And so that method of choosing state senators was shut down by the courts in 1964 in the Reynolds v. Sims case. Reynolds v. Sims. And now, so what happens now is they gerrymander the districts, for the population to make it equal for each district, for democracy's sake. So what has happened now? I'll give you an example of California. In California, it used to be 1 senator per county. For a while, they even changed it because we added more counties, and it was in a handful of rural counties. It was like 2 counties for 1 senator. But for the most part, it was 1 per county. Just like you have 2 per state of the U.S. Senate. And the county leadership chose, well, if you got the county leadership choosing, do we have more red counties or blue counties in California?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Senate would look the state Senate would look a lot different, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Now, but today, because of what they've done, changing it from being a republic to a democracy, Senate District 2 has 8 counties, but LA County has 13 districts.
Yeah.
So who has the real power in the Senate now? The population centers.
Yeah.
If we were now, let's remember the 17th Amendment, the U.S. Senate, and what I just told you for one last little bit of information. So now, let's say we go back to that system. First of all, we go back to 1 state senator per county, with county leadership choosing. Is our state Senate going to look different? Yes.
Absolutely.
It's going to be controlled by the Republicans. The assembly will still be blue, but the state Senate will be red. Now, if the 17th Amendment's gone and the state legislatures are appointing senators, well, gosh, we have 1 red house, 1 blue house. So they're going to have to compromise. California then would have 1 Democrat U.S. senator and 1 Republican U.S. senator.
Wow.
If we were to go back to being a republic like it was originally intended, the blue states wouldn't be so blue, and we would have 76 Republican U.S. senators.
Wow. So all of this changed with I can't remember the something versus Sims that you mentioned. So that was in Alabama.
Reynolds v. Sims.
And you said it was
Alabama was sued.
And so that court case in Alabama basically threw every other state out of whack then? Is that what happened?
Exactly. Every state had to follow it. And there was already a handful of them that were doing it in a more democratic manner. And Alabama refused to change. And so they got sued, and the person suing the state of Alabama basically said, oh gosh, it's not very democratic. Aren't we a democracy?
Yeah.
Now, see, if the judges and the politicians and all those people understood the Constitution, their first response would have been, no, we're not a democracy.
Yeah.
You idiot. Don't change it.
I think sometimes they understand it, but they just want a certain outcome. But yeah, I agree with you.
Well, the thing is, see, but it's nothing new.
Yeah.
See, 5 times in the Federalist Papers, 5 times in the Federalist Papers, James Madison explains the difference between a democracy and a republic. Why did he do that? Because even back then, the foes of the U.S. Constitution was trying to convince everybody that a democracy and a republic were the same thing.
Right.
So it goes all the way back that far.
Yeah.
And you hear people, I say, well, it's a republic. I say, well, yeah, democracy, whatever. Or we're a democratic republic. No, we're a republic.
Yes.
Democracy was supposed to be a minor part of it.
Yeah. Wow.
And the founders did it that way for checks and balances, to make sure nobody had too much power, nobody did too much of anything, including us.
Yeah. Well, it's like the old saying, democracy, a pure democracy is the wolves and the sheep, or 3 wolves and 2 sheep taking a vote on what's for dinner or something like that.
Yeah, well, it goes 2 wolves and a sheep or three wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner.
Yeah.
A republic is three wolves and a well-armed sheep deciding what to have for dinner.
I like that. That's very good. I'm going to steal that. That's awesome.
But, well, the thing is, Jefferson said that a democracy is tyranny of the majority, mob rule, where 51% can vote away the rights of the other 49%.
Yeah.
John Adams said there's never been a democracy that didn't commit suicide, and Madison said that democracies are short in their lives and violent in their death.
Yeah, that's very true. Wow, this has been awesome. I'm so glad that you got back to me, that I somehow got a hold of you.
Very cool.
I'm hoping that we can have more conversations like this in the future.
Now you're in the Redlands area, right?
I live in Beaumont actually, but I grew up in Redlands.
Live in Beaumont?
Yeah, I grew up in Redlands. So Inland Empire is where I call home. Yucaipa, Redlands, Beaumont, pretty much all over the place.
Are you working a day job right now?
Yes, I am. I work. My boss builds substations for Edison, so I do electrical work for him. So
okay, well, the reason I was asking is because the Beaumont class is in the morning, so if you have a day job, that's usually pretty tough. But
yeah.
That said, you let me know. I've got a lot. I'm in Beaumont so much people think I live in Beaumont. I actually live down in Murrieta.
Right.
But I remember when one of the candidates out of Palm Springs, the former police chief of Palm Springs, was running for Chad Mays' seat.
Uh-huh.
And he calls me up and he says, "Hey man, we need to get together. So what would be in the middle for you? Like Cabazon?" I'm like, "Huh? No, Beaumont would be in the middle." He's like, "Oh, I thought you lived in Beaumont." Yeah, everybody does.
Wow.
Because I'm up there so much. Because there's a Banning Beaumont Cherry Valley Tea Party I've been closely related to for years and years and years and years. Plus, I do the class there.
I've been planning on contacting them too. Yeah.
Yeah, Dale Dillman, who you talked to, he used to be a student in my class long ago in Temecula, and he has shown up to the one there in Beaumont a couple times, and he's also sometimes those Tea Party meetings. I haven't been to the Tea Party meetings since the COVID thing because I've had a lot of other things going on, and because they haven't been meeting at the restaurant. So what has happened is their meetings have gotten more locally centric, which, because I don't live in the area, it kind of, it really doesn't concern me. But when they were meeting at the restaurant, they talked a lot more about national politics, which is really more my thing, even though I do believe in being, locally centric. I'm glad they are. But, I really talk more about national because I'm a Constitution guy. But that said, you let me know, and we'll come up and have lunch or dinner or something. Marla's, where I have my class, is open.
Very cool.
They're seating people down, and it's good food.
Awesome. Very good. Well, like I said, I'm so happy and blessed that we got together to have this conversation. Hopefully we can have many more, and God bless you. Thank you. Keep doing what you're doing. And
thanks for having me.
United we stand, right?
United we stand. Here's how I end every radio show. United we stand. Combined we kick butt. God bless America, and God bless you.
Awesome. I like that. And with that, I'd like to thank everybody for watching. And Doug, I hope we get to talk again. I'm going to go ahead and end the call right now. I don't want to just hang up on you while I'm talking here. But thank you again for taking the time, brother.
No problem.
All right, bye. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end the show. That is probably the longest podcast I've ever done. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find a way to split that into two. But what a great conversation. Awesome educational stuff. I learned a lot. I hope you guys learned some stuff. I'm going to have to watch the thing myself to go over it again so I can retain some of that stuff. But he gave us some good references and some good books to look at. And I am definitely interested in hearing more about the Constitutional Convention. So I hope you guys will take the initiative and learn about that stuff too. I keep forgetting I have a toll-free number now, and I need to put it at the beginning of the show because I know most people don't watch the whole show all the way through, but the number is 833-9-832-708. So that is what I'm calling the Agent of Change hotline. It's 24/7. You can leave a message. Right now it has an automated message. So it's going to come on and say something like the person you're trying to reach isn't available. Go ahead and leave a message about topics for future shows, comments about any show that you've watched, any episode that you've watched. If there's things you disagree with, leave a message. If there's things you agree with and you want to build upon, if there's things going on in your community that are being productive that you want to share with other communities so we can all get together and take our country back, that would be awesome. I have the website, politicaltruths832.com. A lot of information on there. This is how we got to do it. We got to band together. We got to unite. We got to take the power back. Gavin Newsom is almost getting his walking papers. We need to make that happen. Follow through with that. If you are active in that, stay active. They say we have enough signatures, but we want to go above and beyond so that Gavin's team of lawyers won't be able to change the outcome of that. Get connected, get involved. Doug brought up the Beaumont Cherry Valley Tea Party. That's something I've been meaning to check out. Join a group, form a group, check it out, go out there. It's going to be exciting. You're going to make friends. You're going to meet people that have so much good information that you can use in your life. And we have to make connections. We're stronger when we're together. So on that note, I'm going to leave it at that. Brian Sr., Political Truths 832. I'm out.